What if? Those are the first two words of a question that has been asked a million different times in a million different contexts. And it's not hard to see why. Reality is reality, and reality often sucks or is boring simply because it is known. What is known is just less interesting than what is unknown. But the idea of what if something that didn't happen did, or something that did happen didn't, and the subsequent domino effect, it is inherently interesting because it is unknown. What if the Library of Alexandria wasn't burned down? What if the Axis powers won the war? What if JFK wasn't assassinated, or Abraham Lincoln wasn't assassinated, or Martin Luther King, or Archduke Franz Ferdinand, or like a million different other people? A lot of what ifs are about assassinations. But really, that's not the first question that comes to mind for most people when they hear what if. Really, it's something more like, what if the Seahawks ran the ball? Sports are a lot easier to speculate on because the rules, parameters, and trends are a lot easier to read than historical what-ifs, which are a lot less binary. What if is one of the most commonly asked questions in sports, and its prominence truly cannot be overstated, but there are some big problems with the question itself as well as the discourse surrounding the question, and these problems are a part of the foundation of some of the most annoying arguments in sports. Welcome to NBA Deep Dive. Derrick Rose was pretty good. Even if you weren't around for when he had his MVP season, you've definitely heard about it. I became an NBA fan in the 2012-13 season, and not only that, but I was a Bulls fan, so I obviously heard plenty about the legendary MVP Derrick Rose. Of course, the reason why I heard the legend and didn't see it with my own two eyes was, well,
You bypassed the Harbor team in Miami Heat. Rose came down bad on his left foot. See him holding onto his knee and down. He was flying and he came down wrong on the left foot. Now whether it was an ankle or a knee, I do not know. Collins out
yeah.
there. Ball is 2 minutes running, and this with the injury, we just
So you don't hear the name Derrick Rose and think of how good he is or was as a player. It might be part of what you think, but for me, and I think most people, the name Derrick Rose immediately puts this image in my brain. Derrick Rose is one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history, and because of this, his story and essentially his legacy ends up being chalked up to a simple what-if question, which is the first problem with what-ifs. A player's legacy or a team's legacy now becomes a what-if rather than it standing alone as it was. Reality isn't what's associated with the name, it's what it could have been, an idea, a dream, a fantasy. Look at this guy right here. Okay, so yeah, he's technically me, but I couldn't afford the stock footage. He's supposed to represent an NBA fan. Have some imagination. This guy is in Fantasyland. He does not live in the moment. He doesn't live with the reality of the situation. He represents NBA fans stuck in the past, living in a world that hasn't ever truly existed outside of his own mind. One of the biggest problems with what ifs is people taking them further than just a fun thought exercise. Instead, they elect to use what ifs as an excuse to deny reality. And when people start denying reality, that's when you start to see some truly wild takes. I have seen people go as far as to say that LeBron James's legacy is contingent on Derrick Rose having torn his ACL, that he caught a break when that piece was taken off of the board. Now, that take as a whole is obviously bullshit. I mean, LeBron destroyed Rose and the Bulls in the conference finals in 2011, and no matter how good Rose was and could have been, there is not a world where LeBron's legacy is single-handedly thwarted by him. But you see, this is where it becomes particularly problematic, when what-ifs are used to discredit reality. Of course, there is this Derrick Rose example, but one of the most common instances of what-ifs denying reality is in the playoffs. Look at the finals in recent years. What if Draymond Green did not get suspended in Game 6? What if KD did not tear his Achilles in the 2019 finals? While pondering these questions in and of itself is not inherently wrong, it becomes a problem when the idea of what it could have been now means that these rings and the accomplishment that they are now invalid. The accomplishment is treated as though it no longer exists because it theoretically could have gone a different way. Those finals could have had different outcomes had these what-ifs transpired. Therefore, it is inherently assumed that it goes the way of the what-if, and thus reality is no longer the valid option. The idea of what could have happened is given more credit and validity than what literally actually happened. At that point, what-if are no longer a fun thought exercise, but now an annoying point of a debate that shouldn't exist to begin with. And the reason the idea of what happens in the what if is treated as the true reality is the next part of the problem, and that is damn near everyone's version of the what if always plays out in the most positive way feasible. Remember the days when NBA YouTube was just completely dominated by what if videos? I definitely do.
The 2003 NBA draft has already established a reputation as one of the greatest collection of players to ever enter the league at the same time.
In fact, it was really the original groundwork I put in to grow this channel. For those who weren't around for the trend, it was primarily started by Mike Korzemba, and then guys like Nick Smith and, well, me made videos in the same vein. What ifs are really what birthed NBA YouTube to begin with. They were an easy path to easy views. But a long time ago, I noticed a trend with these videos, both in consuming them as a watcher and making them myself as a creator. They always skewed overwhelmingly positive in the direction of the original what if. I phrase it like that because these things tend to devolve into being about different things and not about the original what if, but essentially what I mean is whatever the title what if is, it's always going to go in a positive direction for that one. But in a what if about Chris Paul being traded to the Lakers, every time that video is going to have the Lakers winning a few championships, at the bare minimum at least one. What if Derrick Rose did not tear his ACL? Well, obviously he becomes an even better player and the Bulls win multiple championships, even though it's extremely rare for a player like Rose to win as a lone 20+ point per game guy. Sure, why not? Of course it goes really well. How else would it go? Seriously. Try and find somebody's played out what if, where they really go through every detail in every year and they see what if could have happened. And see if the Chicago Bulls don't win a single championship if Derrick Rose doesn't tear his ACL in that what if. I guarantee you're not going to find it. that version of the what if is not going to exist, even though it's a very real possibility, because it's always going to skew in a positive direction. Reality will fill in gaps in a lot less of an interesting way than where we will fill in those gaps. It's always going to be more storybook when we're the one writing what reality is than when reality is writing what it is. Again, reality is boring. Reality doesn't often go in the interesting route, but if I'm imagining what would have been, well, my brain will make up something that is more storybook and more fun than what reality is going to create. Now, this is not to say that the Chicago Bulls with Derrick Rose or the Lakers, if they traded for Chris Paul, don't win a championship, because with any what if, who's really to say? But to treat those outcomes, the most positive possible outcomes, as the default, that's a big problem. It is just one of the infinite possibilities. But people look at what ifs through rose-colored glasses, and because of that, the red flags of the scenario just end up looking like regular old flags, and they miss it. So because things in the what if are peachy, sunshine and rainbows, that means that the contrast on the other side of the coin, reality, is at best bland and more often treated as straight up bad. Reality is boring by comparison to Fantasyland. You see the problem here, right? The existence of what-ifs in the way that they are entertained keeps us rewriting history in different ways that gives us all different perspectives. Basketball quickly becomes not what it is, but the idea of what it could have been. What could have been overshadows what is. And because we have different ideas of what could have been for 1,000 different scenarios, it keeps us in these pointless arguments over hypotheticals, while what actually happened just kind of awkwardly sits on the sidelines. It's not worthy of discussion. And frankly, this issue is more prevalent than you might think. What ifs are more prevalent than you might think. You can make a what if out of damn near anything, especially when it comes to the playoffs or a player's legacy. Hell, they pop up within seconds of them happening. The buzzer goes off, and then real soon the talk of the town is what could have happened instead of what actually did. The second the buzzer goes off, man, if this play didn't happen, if this call was made, if this shot went in, if this player wasn't injured, if with a dash of fucking if. Now, this is not me saying that what ifs are bad. I don't think they are, and indulging in the conversation around them can be relatively fun and interesting, but the problem lies in the degree in which they are taken seriously, the degree in which speculation clouds the truth of the matter. I understand the impulse. It comes from a place of emotion. Sports are an emotional thing for those who are heavily invested in them. God knows that I know that. Whenever my therapist asks me how my week was, how the Chicago Bulls did that week pretty much always comes up. It's that serious. I assume that if you're watching this, the odds are relatively high that you share that same passion and love for the game, whether it be basketball, football, or whatever other sport. I'm sure there are some cricket what-ifs out there, I don't know. And when I say the phrase, what if Seattle ran the ball, a lot of Seahawk fans understandably get in their emotions.
Immortality, baby, come on! What the fuck was that? Oh my god!
People who watch Derrick Rose take a franchise that had been nothing but profoundly mediocre in the decade preceding the final retirement of Michael Jordan understandably feel very emotional about his ACL tear and feel as though the world where it doesn't happen is better, grass is greener and all that. Hell, I don't really relate to that one because, as I mentioned, I miss Derrick Rose MVP season, and I actually became a fan the season preceding his ACL tear, but I do have a specific what if that has kept me up at night before, and one that's gone under the radar over the years. 2015. Game 4 of the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. The Chicago Bulls are up 2-1 on the Cleveland Cavaliers, ironically enough, after Derrick Rose hit a game-winning 3 over Tristan Thompson in Game 3. Late in the game, it is all tied up as things have started to go Chicago's way. Cleveland's head coach at the time, David Blatt, tries frantically to call a timeout, but the Cavs do not have a timeout. Calling a timeout when you do not have one causes a violation, which results in the Bulls getting 2 free throws and possession of the ball. And being that this was in the last few seconds of the game and they were tied, that was pretty much going to be game. There he is, right there. That's like a colossal mistake with devastating consequences most of the time. Just ask Chris Webber. The Bulls would have been up 3-1 on LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers, but the refs did not make the call, and instead LeBron did this.
James for the win. It's gone. LeBron James at the buzzer stuns the Chicago Bulls, and the series is tied at 2 games apiece.
I was 15. I was emotional, and it is a core sports memory of mine. I had every reason to be bitter, and hell, I was. I would tell anyone who would listen that the Bulls got screwed over and the Bulls should have been up 3-1 and they would have beat the fraudulent Hawks in the conference finals and they would have made the finals. And yes, I would not disagree with the statement that the Warriors obviously win that series, but damn it, man, at least a finals appearance is something, especially by comparison to what I'm used to. But as I got older, at a certain point, I had to let it go. In reality, the Cavs could have come back from 3-1 because the Bulls had no business being up 3-1 to begin with. The Cavs proceeded to smack the Bulls in the following 2 games after Game 4, so it's not unreasonable that they could have done the same for a third time. And hell, even if they did win this series, it ultimately wouldn't have mattered in the grand scheme of things because it's just a finals appearance. And this one missed call should not, in my head, recontextualize the entirety of the 2015 playoffs. And I really shouldn't be losing sleep over something that ultimately was not that consequential. And even if it was, ultimately, that version of events is a hypothetical. When I say I understand these people, I mean that shit. A what if has echoed in my mind to a maddening degree before, and I would not be surprised if it does again. But you also have to accept reality as it is, even if reality is not particularly fun. Reality is reality. Fantasy is fantasy. And if you spend your days harping on what could have been rather than what is, at what point are you no longer really a sports fan and just a fan of the idea of what sports could have been? As I said earlier, where this mentality clouded by what ifs becomes particularly frustrating is when it is used to take away a player or team's accomplishments. Take LeBron. There is this meme that is also like not entirely a joke that I've been seeing going around on Twitter that basically boils down to 2013 Ray Allen, 2016 Draymond suspension, 2020 bubble frauds. 2013, what if Ray did not hit perhaps the biggest shot in NBA history? 2016, what if Draymond was not suspended for kicking players in the nuts? 2020, what if a goddamn plague did not happen and thus the circumstances of the bubble did not exist? So the point there is basically that none of LeBron's rings are legit. Taking away that accomplishment and what it means for LeBron's career and legacy. Sure, on paper he has 4 rings, but those were Mickey Mouse rings anyway, so does it really count? When accomplishments are discredited because there was an avenue in which that accomplishment was not achieved, that is when what ifs go a step too far. And when what ifs dominate this conversation, it does not allow us to appreciate reality as it is. Even if sometimes reality is boring or in some cases painful, it does have one thing on fantasy. At least it's actually real. Okay, I'm not even gonna say the "oh wow, I released a deep dive again" line, because at this point the inconsistency of the series is what it is and I'm just becoming a parody of myself. But for real, the reason why this video took so long to come out is I burned myself the fuck out in December. Even in December I was supposed to release 2 more deep dives than I actually did, and I went through a depressive state to open the year, but I do finally feel like I'm landing back on my feet now that I've finished this project. But I can't lie, this has definitely been a rough start to the year. The next deep dive that is on this channel should ideally come out in the middle of February, and then at the end of the month I am hoping to drop the biggest and most likely best deep dive that I have ever done and probably will ever do. That video being the dehumanization of athletes video that I have talked about making a million times but haven't actually gotten around to doing, so hopefully that one's coming out relatively soon. If you've made it this far, I can only assume that you enjoyed the video, so if you could do me a favor and drop a like, that would be much appreciated. And if you are new here, go ahead and subscribe. Hopefully this series can actually become more frequent than it has been so far. When I originally conceptualized this series, I thought I was going to do it once a week, and then from all of 2021 I released just 10 of them. So much for that goal. Hopefully this year things will be a little bit more consistent. But yeah, that is it. Goodbye.